One topic that is of interest to people all over our network and all around the world is this question of advocacy. I think we all feel like we could be doing more to mobilize civil society, to mobilize movements, to mobilize government, to bring about changes in education or to contribute to the momentum for change in our communities and countries. We want to advance our shared learning on this topic of advocacy and how we use advocacy as part of that effort to bring about change. So the questions are what the why, what, and how of advocacy, essentially. Why we use this thing, what it looks like when it's done well, how we do it. And we're very fortunate that we're going to be learning from four practitioner organizations from around our network. Janine, over to you first.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janine Hyatt. I am Director of Collective Action at the Fair Education Alliance. That's our team. We're a pretty small team. There's 14 of us. And we are a coalition of 285 organizations across sectors. So we have some businesses, trusts, and foundations. We have lots of charities and social enterprises, and we have schools, all united in this vision that no child success is limited by their socioeconomic background. So we're essentially trying to tackle income-based disadvantage in education. So we have lots of members. And you can imagine that a challenge that comes with leading a coalition like this, particularly when it comes to advocacy, is that there is a great diversity of views and of focuses in our membership. So we have members who are right across kind of the spectrum from quite traditional educationalists to super progressive educationalists. And so something that is one of the joys and the challenges of my role are trying to find the common ground and move our members towards that common ground. So we're just launching our new strategy this week, and it is based around the 6 conditions of systems change. Just a bit of background on us. We've been going for 10 years, and lots of the organizations in our membership kind of do brilliant work to close the gap through school-based interventions. So you might have people providing free breakfast to children. You might have people providing tutoring to children. But we see, despite the good work that's happening, we haven't seen an appreciable change in the gap in educational outcomes and employment outcomes in children and young people. And it felt like we could be at this forever and not see that change. And so I think what we were trying to start a conversation about with our members is what would it take to actually shift the conditions that are holding this problem in place? Like, what would it take for us to not have to exist eventually? So we've been using this, it's called the Water of Systems Change model. We didn't invent it, but it looks at these different levels. So the structural change, the policies, practices, and resource flows, then the relational change. So that's who has power, who holds relationships. And then at the root of it is the thorniest thing, which is the mental models. But if you can shift people's mental models, then that's really transformational. And we've been trying to do some of that work with our membership. So here we're talking about policies mostly, right? But I think to get on the same page for what policies we advocate for, sometimes you've got to shift those mental models as well to think longer term. So our work has 3 strands. We have collective voice. That is our policy work that's trying to align what our members are asking for, get us all singing from the same hymn sheet and pointing in the same direction. We have collective action, where we bring our members together around themes like early education or like literacy, but we also bring members together about around their regions, their geographic locations. And then we have collective strength, filling skills gaps and building capacity in our membership so that they can engage in collective action and can do more advocacy together with us. So we see it as part of a journey. So I'm going to talk about, I put win in quotation marks here because it's not something that it's like, yes, clear policy has been achieved and that's a great outcome for young people, but it's something that we've seen real progress on. So we are part of a coalition called Our Wellbeing, Our Voice. And this is led by a group of our members alongside us. And it started with one particular member called Be Well that had started a well-being measurement program for children and young people. And it was really powerful. The data they were able to collect was really powerful. And we could see that you could, looking at data about young people's well-being, you could get under the skin of a lot of issues like why aren't they turning up to school anymore? Why is behavior more of an issue? Why are they not engaging when they're in class? And we thought it was really powerful. We haven't led this advocacy, but what we have done is try to have lots of conversations with our members about the value of it and build a critical mass of members who are willing to support this coalition. And we now do have a big group of members that see the direct benefit to their work, even though it's not a government contract putting money in their pocket. We've been able to connect those dots about why they should think longer term and support something outside their direct interests. So that's one that I'm really proud of. And I think I'll end it there.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rishabh. I'm a 2015 Teach for India alum and currently a program lead with the Education Alliance in India. I currently lead a program on improving skill education and digital transformation for the state education department. For context, India has multiple states which might be equivalent to provinces in some of the countries you come from. I have been working in the government and advocacy space for almost a decade now. To give you a brief context about my organization, the Education Alliance works with various governments to deploy high quality teams where the teams can then work with state and non-state actors to co-create solutions that improve quality of education. The ultimate purpose of the organization is to build an ecosystem where governments can strategically partner with various organizations and collectively work on a collective way forward to improve public schools and ultimately benefit our children. Our teams are currently working with five state governments on a host of projects, which include foundational literacy and numeracy, skill education, teacher capacity, and more. Let me double click on an advocacy project that I am currently leading. It's around revamping applied education or skill education for 200,000 students in state of Punjab in India. To quickly set the context, in India, along with sciences, commerce, and arts education, government schools also offer vocational courses or skill applied learning courses around beauty and wellness, banking services, electrician, so which help students take up jobs right after K-12 education system. These courses are mostly relevant for students from the most difficult socioeconomic backgrounds or some those not interested in pursuing science, commerce, or maybe not interested in taking up higher education. So that allows them to take up jobs right after K-12. However, the current vocational education, skill education framework in India is not in sync with the industry requirements or the job opportunities that's available in the market. What industry needs, what a student is offering, or the skill set that student is offering is a big mismatch. Further, the entire framework then allows uh, lack of one does not give enough depth to the students' academic depth as well as render them unemployable. There is significant lack of future career pathways for students who take up skill education, vocational education in terms of career progressions in jobs versus as well as in higher education, which sort of leads only and only in state of Punjab leads is roughly responsible for school dropouts of 250,000 students. So that's the problem and scale that currently I'm dealing with in Punjab in school education system. What we are doing right now is we have started a fully revamped school to work program, which is now also a state policy that government has accepted, and it's a full-fledged policy of the state now, where we are bringing fundamental shifts in how students experience skill education with largely three objectives or shifts. One, that students should get better jobs with better career progressions, higher pay, and more security, which is which is being achieved through better course design, job and career mapping, as well as unlocking more career pathways for the students. Second is more joyful and classroom experience, which we are co-creating with industry partners. So the industry partners, for example, a Lakme or a VLCC or an Orin will come and help us design the curriculum for beauty and wellness, which so the industry is helping us students learn what industry needs eventually, and more student bringing in 40 to 50% component of industrial exposure through internships, through master classes, through other various means, versus only main a 100% academic component that is conventionally part of learning systems. The last third shift that we are fundamentally looking at is how does the system, which is state, department, education boards, and training verticals, deliver skill education, which has not been a mainstream focus so far. So building capacity of education boards, department on right from curriculum design to assessments to teacher capacity to career counseling, higher education pathways. So fundamentally, we are looking at the entire chain from what student learns in the class to how student goes out in the job market. So that is the entire spectrum of in skill education that we are covering, and hopefully looking to in some form impact almost 300 250 to 300,000 students in next 2 to 3 years.
Hi everyone, good morning. Buenos días a todos. Thank you for having us. I'm in behalf of Mexicanos Primero, I'm the director of education policy analysis. Mexicanos Primero first is a civil society organization with 18 years of experience, committing on advancing the right to be in a school, learn in school, and participate in a school for children and young people in Mexico. We act independently in the sense that we do not receive public funds, but we work with other organizations, not only in Mexico, but also in the region. Like I see we have people here from Brazil. We work with Todos por la Educación. We work for Argentinos por la Educación. So that's a little bit about us. One of the most recent initiatives that we have is called Monito, or Education Monitoring Platform. We launched it in January 2025. It's relatively new, as a tool that centralizes key information about education authorities, sectoral programs, indicators, data at both federal and state level. In Mexico, we have 32 states. Monito was born for a very practical reflection. How much time do we spend looking for information? Especially because in our country we have recently have issues with transparency and data being available. So as an organization that we're already doing it, we wanted to put in the service of others. So therefore, it's not just about collecting data, but about driving improvement in education, giving information to other people, to other actors that are in the same boat that us.
En pocos meses hemos visto un impacto concreto. Dos estados, por ejemplo, publicaron finalmente sus programas sectoriales en educación, después de más de 3 años de retraso. En otro, nuestras observaciones llevaron a cambios sustantivos en un informe oficial, y en otra secretaría estatal ya usan nuestro modelo de monito como una referencia para crear su propio sistema de información educativo. Además, hemos recibido reconocimientos internacionales. Monito fue seleccionado para la Network in Action de la MGG Academic 2025 y Data Innovation Lab del Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores de Alemania. Lo incluyó en su Project Showcase como ejemplo de cómo la ciencia de datos puede transformar políticas públicas. También vemos intereses constantes. En sus primeros 6 meses, más de 1,100 visitas mensuales en Monito. Y a nivel personal, antes de sumarme a Mexicanos Primero, participé en Enseña por México y estuve más de 2 años en aula, en escuelas públicas de primaria y bachillerato, y esa experiencia y territorio me permitió conocer de cerca la realidad de nuestro sistema educativo y hoy, desde Mexicanos Primero, puedo llevar esa vivencia a la incidencia en políticas públicas, trabajando en proyectos como Monito.
And it's precisely that combination, experience in the classroom, experience in the Ministry of Education, and policy and data analysis that inspired us. In less than a month, we're going to launch our second version, transforming the platform into a true analysis tool to continue and advancing the right to learn for every children and youth in Mexico. So thank you very much, and visit our platform. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is Praveen. I work in a philanthropic foundation in India. The advocacy win I'm going to talk to you about is, so India, for the first time, has actually shown dramatic improvements in what people call foundational learning, which is like basic literacy and numeracy skills. Both the government and non-governmental data mentions that. And this has happened because of a government program which was launched about 4 years back, right? And the win that I'm going to talk to you about is how did we convince the government to actually launch that program? Before we start, I mean, India is the world's most populous country. We have about 1.5 million schools. We have 250 million students in the school system. The context was that I think everyone in India, from government downwards, were convinced that India is facing a learning crisis, right? So we were getting all children to school, but learning inside schools wasn't happening. And I think Rishabh mentioned that India is also a deeply federal country. So that was a little bit of a lay of land. What we did was one very simple thing. We had very, very specific asks from all the key stakeholders, right? We wanted the government to radically prioritize foundational learning, make it India's single most important priority. And to that, we wanted them to launch a national program with increased funding. So I think the first thing that we did was being extremely specific about what we wanted each stakeholder, right from the central government to a bunch of state governments, to do. Second thing was that created a lot of data and evidence around why this matters, right? So while everyone in the country was talking about learning is important, to convince everyone that the problem is that learning is not happening in early years, and to make a logical connection between, entire learning crisis India is facing, but the root cause of the problem is that the early years India is lagging behind, right? So just making a little bit of that logical connection between what is needed and where we are. Third thing we did was each government is a little worried of launching something without seeing results, right? So given that India is a deeply federal country, worked a lot with 2 or 3 state governments to actually start large-scale programs. So just not wait for national government to launch something, try to create enough proof points so that there is enough momentum behind it. Finally, did a lot of one-on-one meetings with all the key stakeholders and try to create a very simple stakeholder map to say who are the people who absolutely get it, who are the people who need more convincing, and who are the people who are active detractors, and created a slightly more customized strategy for each of these groups. And finally, while advocacy is important, ultimately advocacy also needs a lot of preparation in terms of material. So one of the questions we kept on asking ourselves is that if tomorrow, like say, the senior most education bureaucrat in the country asks us that we are totally convinced on what you are saying, are you ready with the plan of action? Reforms happen when preparation meets opportunity. So just having that extremely high level of preparation created a 300-page blueprint on that if tomorrow the government is willing to do so, we should be ready from day 0 to what a day 365 would look like, right? So that extreme level of preparation matters. And again, one good thing happened was that India was rewriting its national education policy, a once in about 30-year document, met the national education policy folks, people who were writing it, showed them all the data, evidence, including, for example, like say, what are the things that it is going to do. And the national education policy, once it came out, it actively advocated for that. It had a very specific line that this is India's highest, most urgent priority. And therefore, while everything is important, this has to happen for India to build a very strong base. So it heavily endorsed that, but also had one very specific thing that now the government should launch a mission in order to do so. So convinced on the policy part, but we also had supporting document on what the mission would look like, right? So we had the entire detailing done of why the central government should spend about $2 billion over the next 5 years on this foundational learning program, and why and what sort of a structure it should follow, right? So I think these are the 4 or 5 things that led to, for example, India launching Nipun Bharat, which is a foundational learning program. And our learning from that has been reforms happen when preparation meets opportunity. And as people outside create those windows of opportunities and be active about it, but also keep extremely, extremely high level of preparation.
As everybody was sharing, and thank you all for those great presentations to set the scene, the 2 things I was thinking about were the why of advocacy. And I guess I kind of had started with a simple story in mind. The why is to get the government to do something. But I think, clearly the why is broader than that when we're thinking about changing systems. We heard about getting the system learning, generating better data, building a critical mass, engaging stakeholders that might not normally be engaged. So the why feels bigger. And then the other thing was like the what, the kind of nuts and bolts. Like what's the stuff that really makes advocacy effective? What are the tricks of the trade, the sort of secrets, like how change really happens? And again, there was some of that, the clarity of your ask of somebody. Generating data for the system seems to be something that like a few of you are doing, creating a sense of urgency, generating proof points, one-to-one meetings with stakeholders behind the scenes, stakeholder mapping to work out who those people are, having a plan of action. All of these like feel like the nuts and bolts. But I want to follow up especially on the sort of like the why and the what. So as I talk about that why and the what, and you guys think about your work, what's missing from my account? When you think about the nuts and bolts, like these practices are the really critical practices. What would you say they are? Like if you're going to be an effective person within this advocacy space, like what do you really have to be good at day to day? What are like the 1, 2, or 3 things? And then what do you understand about the why? Is it just about government, or is it about something bigger or different?
I think the why for most of us is clear, right? That like change in policy can have a huge impact in the work we're trying to do to achieve like a more equitable education system. I think the what is like much more complicated based on what your position is. Like, so for example, we are a coalition. We are never going to be the expert on any individual issue. So it's kind of like, what is your position? If you are, our position is that the what is trying to influence lots of people who are influencing. So that means what we need to have is like a wealth of relationships and a really good understanding of like how things link together in the landscape. So that when in that example I used, advocating for a national children's well-being measurement program, we could see how that would directly impact lots of different people's work and make the sell on them to get them on board. Whereas I think the what would look quite different if, for example, we were a research organization or if we were a food poverty organization and we were the ones producing the new data that's really compelling. Then what you need is like the really strong data, a really like compelling way of communicating it, and a select number of relationships with like very clear decision makers who are going to take that data and put it into a government strategy. So I think the first thing for us was thinking like, where do we sit in this like entire ecosystem of people trying to make change? And are we outsiders or insiders? And what's our kind of like route to influence?
Rishabh, what would you say?
I think on the why of advocacy, what I can think, I think the answer that comes to my mind is it's important. It is hard and it has to be done. And only the government is not enough. So for me, that's the why, that only government, it is a civil society and government and people as a whole who have to, I don't think I'm changing or doing it for somebody else. I think I'm doing it for myself. So it is important, it has to be done, and all of us have to do it collectively together. It is the why of advocacy for me. What of it and the practices, what in my a decade of experience, what I've found, usually most technically sound solution is not what usually works. It has to be a combination of what's technically sound, what's administratively feasible, what's operationally doable, what's legally tenable, what's financially viable, and what is politically acceptable. So, and more recently, what is more emotionally acceptable to people. I think all of these combined together comes together uh, to be able to create a policy solution that could probably work in uh, a longer timeline.
So can we go to Viviana, Alejandra? What are you thinking of? Like, what else would you share about the why and the kind of behind the scenes nuts and bolts of how you do this work effectively? Like, what's the critical stuff for you?
Well, for us, I'm going with Rishabh and this one, the why, because we believe that, first of all, education is not just about the government or not just about the parents who have their kids in school. It's about a society, right? So that's the reason why you have to try again and again and again and again, right? And how I'm going with what Janine just said about compelling way to communicate your message, or how to translate your technical knowledge into something that appeals to others. And I think that sometimes that's the difficult part, because the technical knowledge, like you work with experts who know about education, but sometimes you have to communicate to other people who are not precisely experts, but they have to say in the decision, or that about what you're trying, right, to communicate. That's something that happened with us, is like with Monito, it's not just about presenting the data, it's how you present it in a way that it can be used, because other way it's just like a bunch of numbers and things that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So it's a lot about that, how you present, how you use the information to build your message, and that message accomplish something that you want.
Monito ha permitido comunicarnos con personas que están directamente trabajando con las políticas educativas de muchas entidades. En mi experiencia, me ha permitido viajar en todo el país y ver los retos que hay en cada una de las entidades, que es muy diversa.
Yeah, thanks, Viviana. Praveen, would you add anything to what you shared initially on those questions?
Couple of things, right? One is that for at least the most successful advocacy efforts that I have seen are integrated deep into organization strategy. It's very hard to just do advocacy by itself. So advocacy program, your monitoring and learning, like each has to get very tightly integrated, because there are very few wins which are just stroke of the pen reforms, right? So you are advocating for something, but you don't have a program to back that up. Like very rarely sees like an advocacy win, right? So one, I think at a meta level, just try to create a slightly more integrated strategy for an organization to say, if you have ABC goals, and any goal that an organization has outside direct program you need to convince people, right? And convincing people is all then about advocacy. So I think at one level, advocacy is the answer for a lot of things that we struggle with. But second thing, which I feel like a lot of organizations don't do, is try and marry their advocacy strategy, their communication strategy, their program, like into one cohesive whole, and then try to like figure it out at what is the right sequencing for it. Right? The second level, I think, is just the level of preparation it takes. It's a chicken and egg problem. A lot of people sometimes don't get convinced because A, they don't like the idea, but second is that, and more importantly, especially in a sector like education, they are not convinced that it can happen. So like, you can't just convince people sometimes just by intellectual argument. People need to see proof points, right? And therefore I mentioned that, like, say how like multiple things have to get together. Third is like what I call as a diagnosis of a system, right? Each system is at a level of equilibrium at which it is. Why aren't things happening? So till you don't have your own idea of what is stuck inside a system and what are the top 3 things that will move, it's funding the primary challenge, Okay, then get more funding. Is the policy a primary challenge? Get more policy. Is the institutional architecture the right problem? Or is it that because everything is happening, but this is not being prioritized? So I think your own understanding of why things are stuck and what are the top 2 or 3 things that you're going to do, which are going to at least get the system moving without some sort of both prioritization and understanding of where the reform movement is or where the reform opportunity is, and organization being able to prepare itself, right? Like, till these 3-4 things come together, very rarely you see a successful advocacy effort. And most of the advocacy efforts are not just a stroke of the pen reform, right? Stroke of the pen reforms die. So then at least remaining consistent with the problem statement for a decent long period of time, because the nature of problem changes. So you may have convinced the government to launch a program, but you may realize the program is not working out, right? So then you need to convince the government to say, oh, you need to do an evaluation. So just staying with the problem for a long period of time.
I love that idea of staying with the problem as well. So there's 2 other things that are coming up now, I think. One is about what are the foundations or conditions that make advocacy possible. And I think there's something to do with, your reputation within a system. Like, do you have programs as well as being an advocate? Are you seen as a trusted source? Do you have the relationships you need? Do you have the data that you need? Can you communicate it in an effective way? Like, all of these feel sort of, if you don't have that, your advocacy, will fall on deaf ears. It won't have an impact. And the second thing, and I don't know if I'm right about this, it feels like when doing advocacy, it feels like it's important to be targeted. We're not doing, it feels like, and tell me if I'm wrong, generic advocacy to say, oh, we need a fairer education system. Although that might be kind of deep down what we believe in and where we're working as our big vision. But actually, the advocacy should be sort of targeted at specific issues at specific times. Is that right? Would you agree or disagree with that? Would you say anything about the foundations that we're missing there? Would you say anything about the targeting? Because I like to believe you could have a global movement for transforming education, but maybe that global movement is made up of lots of, micro efforts to push different things with advocacy.
I would love to come in on that, Alex, because we talk about this a lot internally, like how specific do we need to be? Because there's one school of thought that's like you need to have a costed proposal that you like bundle up and give to government and just tell the civil servants what you want to do and where the money's going to come from. But I think there's a bigger picture thing that goes back to, again, each of us having a different role to play in the wider ecosystem, where what the general public cares about, or what practitioners care about, or what just people on the street care about actually matters to our ability to get things done. So here in the UK, if you look at the polls, education was a top issue for people 30 or 40 years ago. And now I think it's 8% of the country rates it as a top issue. That means that everyone's really specific technical advocacy is going to have less traction with elected politicians because they don't feel like their constituents care. So I think that there's a real role for both the people who are like, here's exactly what you need to put into law, and here's the funding we need, and the movement of people that are breaking through the bubble of us in our little charity world and getting through to people on the street and making them care about this as an issue.
We were just meeting last week with a big donor from India, actually, the Shibalal Family Foundation. And he said he'd been in education for 25 years. And he was saying one thing we need to take care of now more in India is demand side for change. So working with parents, families, sort of build the political will. So interesting. But Praveen, I see you have your hand up. I'd love to hear what you wanted to share.
Yeah, so 2 things, right? And I'll react a little bit. Sorry, I wasn't planning to, I'll react a little bit to the demand for change, right? I think there's already enough demand for education. We don't need more demand for education. Like, even in a poor country like India, 50% of parents are sending their children out of their pocket to a private school because there's a demand for education. So at some level, there's enough demand for education. I feel the high quality supply isn't there. But leaving that aside, I think one of the things, at least that personal learning on advocacy has been that talk is cheap, right? So I think while at the end of the day, all of us like to feel happy about, oh, we'll try to create a fairer society. If more people are talking about it, that's easy. I think we don't realize that how easy it is from politicians to policymakers to put their words behind it and not mean anything, right? And therefore, I think it is important to anchor those words with meaningful action. So, okay, you feel that education is a priority, or even within education, for example, girl education is a priority. What does that priority in words translate into? What sort of an action you should be taking in order to demonstrate that you mean business? Is it that, for example, you are actually going to, let's say, pass a law? Is it that, for example, you're going to communicate to all your teachers that this is the most important thing that you're going to focus on? Is it that you're going to put more like budget behind it? I think till we don't convert talk into meaningful actions that different constituents have to take, sometimes it's very easy to a lot of it to remain in thin air and feel generally for like advocates to feel that, oh, like, oh, we are at least making progress because everyone is talking behind it, right? Talk is extremely, extremely cheap. And like policymakers are happy to talk about it. So I think linking talk to concrete actions is a useful, because it's very difficult to measure the effects of your advocacy. And one of the disciplines that I feel organizations should have is try to like hold people and hold themselves accountable to the actions that different constituents are taking and not only what they are speaking. Whatever that is, right? So for example, you may believe that the biggest thing that you want to advocate for is a fairer society. Now, what does a fairer society mean? If you don't have a definition, which like say at some level, there is a common understanding for, then for motherhood and apple pie statements, it's very easy to get people aligned together, right? And this is what I feel also is sometimes a pitfalls for movements, that because you're not sharp about what are the things that you are trying to aggregate on, it becomes a loose, just a talk shop and nothing else happens, right? So I feel just even as a general, very tactical strategy, it is important to have some wins on the board. And once people start seeing some momentum, right, it just builds a little bit of a positive energy. And then you can, of course, have general talk, etc. But it is very, very important to coalesce people around some specific actions that everyone feels that at least these are the things that all of us can advocate for.
And I feel like we're articulating a kind of holistic theory of what's needed there. And I think that sort of seems exactly right. But this is good. So we're very close to the end, unfortunately. And what I would love to do, sort of by way of closing, and Rishabh, if you have something to share, I'm going to get you to wrap it up in your final thought as well. But essentially, we are all, I'm sure, in some way interested in advocacy, working in advocacy, aspiring to do more in the advocacy space. So I would love it if we could just close. If you have a final short thought, please share it. But also, could you share, like, what's your one top piece of advice for people kind of working in or hoping to work in effective advocacy within education? What would you say to people?
So I was just building on Praveen's point that specificity, timelines, and being able to measure policy is also critical, because not everyone has equal level of appetite for abstract. So different layers of policymakers, different stakeholders also need information or need action in different doses to be able to act on it. So not everyone needs that 25-year or a 5-year vision, but a next year's timeline or next year's plan of action is equally important for a junior officer to act on it. And small steps, month and year on, could lead to a larger change. So I think that is also important for a targeted policy. Having said that, my one big learning has been that a lot of policies try to standardize things, which is important and relevant, but deep user research, deep local context of the audience that particular policy is working on is critical. I usually make a distinction between beneficiary and the customer, two terms that one is used in a non-profit policy space. We call people we serve as beneficiaries, versus in a profit startup corporate ecosystem, it's customer. And there is a more power in the hands of a customer because they can walk away, versus beneficiaries more for a policymaker or non-for-profits, it comes from a bit of charity component. So which avoids or leads to pitfall of avoiding user research or deep need analysis of what people truly need for their life to transform. So I think one of my learning has been to do deep, truly understand the audience, the people who would benefit from that particular policy, that particular program, and then loop it back at the highest level to the state or and design the program accordingly.
Thank you, Rishabh. And bonus for anybody who's able to do it, that Ange has put a really good question in the chat here, which is like advocacy is not happening ever on like a level playing field. And this is something that like I always have to remind myself of. You think, oh yeah, everything's level and we're just going to try and make it better. But at the same time, there are forces often that are like pushing the system in another direction. For example, in Europe, there's a push like, should everybody even have the right to education? Have we got our education systems all wrong? So I don't know if anybody can weave that into their closing answer. Like, what does that mean for our pursuit of excellent education for every kid? But if you can, lots of bonus points to you. But let's go to Alejandra, Viviana for your final thought.
Yeah, well, and the topic that we were like talking just a question before, like if we should focus on something or on the generality. In the case of my organization, we do both. We have like really a specific strategic about specific topics, but we also put a lot of time on putting education into the social conversation. Why? Because if it's true that everybody takes their kids to school in Mexico, 90% of the population go to public schools. The reality is that it's not something that is spoken in the media or that generates a demand for its improvement. So we focus a lot of on energy of putting education into the conversation as a general to share like different opinions, different like in the debate, right, about education and other specific things that are really specific, really like this is what we are looking in the law, like really, really small things. But well, in that topic, and what do you need to work in this kind of, I don't know, business or something? I will say passion, but also patience, because it's not something that's gonna happen quickly. You have to be optimistic and you have to be open because just as you say, Alex, in education, you will find different opinions. And you cannot believe that you are the only one with the right answer because doing advocacy is a lot about negotiation also, right? So you have to be open to listen to others' opinion. I'm not saying that you are gonna agree with it, but yes, like you have to open to listen to them. So I will say passion, optimism, and openness to listen to others.
Systematizing all the information, data, and statistic of the education system because otherwise the data disappears. So I I think that is important systematizing all the information.
Thanks, Viviana. Praveen and then Janine.
So very quickly, right? I think again, advocacy has a narrow purpose, right? I don't think so. Like we should try and like get everything into advocacy. So, for example, there's a lot to learn about the advocacy of the right-wing movements across the world, of how they have been able to get certain policy wins, right? So I feel that at the end of the day, advocacy has a narrow purpose, which is that you have a certain amount of objective and you want to convince policy programs, etc., like to your side, right? And use whatever tools, whatever negotiating tactics, etc. you have. But you have to be very clear about what you want at the end of it. So at least my key takeaway is be very clear of what you want and then figure it out that what is the best pathway in order to achieve that. So.
I know we're at time, so I'll be very quick. I'll second Alejandra's point about patience, that it takes a lot of patience, but my spin on it is also relationships. I think if you just invest in relationships over the long term, you will have a group of people who you can draw on for collaboration, to support what you're doing, to spot where you can link up, because I think that is one of the antidotes to like kind of right-wing populism. All of us not seeing each other as competitors or as like it a zero-sum game. Oh, if you support housing, you're not going to support education. the more you have like broad and deep relationships, the more you can kind of find that overlap and make things happen together.
Amazing. Thank you, Janine. So that was a whirlwind and a masterclass. I think there was enough insight in there for us to structure our book on advocacy in education, write a chapter each, and get it out there in front of everybody that needs to see it. So I just want to say a very big thank you to all of our speakers for sharing so openly, honestly, and powerfully.